As part of Cambridge Nationals in Creative iMedia, R081 has a section in LO2 which focuses on legal stuff like legislation. So if you look at the specification here, it shows that legislation that applies to the production of something, so data protection, privacy, defamation, certification and classification, and the use of copyrighted material. We're going to look at certification and classification today by looking at what the BBFC, or the British Board of Film Classification, say about how films and TV and video are classified and how that relates to who they're appropriate for. Okay, so the British Board of Film Classification are known as the BBFC, and when you go to the cinema or you watch something on DVD, you'll tend to find that some sort of warning or instruction is given from them at the beginning of each film. You'll also notice that if you're at the cinema, they also apply the same principle to the trailers that you're going to watch. So for example, if you go and see Beauty and the Beast, all of the trailers will be similar. Maybe it's not in genre of the film, but in the rating, they'll either be the same or less than. The BBFC are independent and they're funded by those people who want you to watch a film, because you can't show a film unless they've classified it. So that, like I said before, they look at films, trailers, advertisements, videos, commercial, internet content, and all manner of other things. They will look at a film when it's released at the cinema. They'll then look at the same film when it's released on DVD, especially if you get sort of the uncut version. And you'll find that the uncut version can actually increase the rating of a film because it's added content. You'll also find that the guiding principles are to protect children and vulnerable adults from unsuitable content and to help people make informed decisions when viewing that content. So they're for you and me, so we know that if we're going to see something, that we're going to see something that contains a low level of language or violence or whatever that might be. The BBFC do look at films before they're created, so somebody who has planned film might show their storyboard and the script to the BBFC, who will then say, okay, I'm going to classify this on what I can see here, I'd recommend a 15. And if the creators are actually aiming that at a target audience of 12, they'll take on board some recommendations and then remove some content to put it in line with what the BBFC says is appropriate, and that is common practice. The BBFC are more than willing to do that to help organisations produce something that is suitable. So there are quite a few factors that affect classification. Some are primary, some are more secondary. So the context, the theme, the tone and the impact, sex and nudity, drugs, language, i.e. swear words, discrimination, imitable behaviour, threats and violence. So they're all things that have to be considered by the BBFC. These are the classifications. We're not going to talk about restricted 18 because it's not really appropriate in the context of this qualification, but you should be familiar with most of these. So U, PG, 12A, 12, 15 and 18. U stands for universal, so it's suitable for everybody. It should be suitable for anyone aged 4 and above, and it's generally a positive, nice film with sort of an overall theme of positivity and happiness. Anything bad is usually counterbalanced with something positive. So, you know, the Wicked Witch is counterbalanced with the heroine and that kind of thing. It's not actually possible to say exactly what would upset a child. So the BBFC have to use their discretion here. They're not saying that just because it's a U that nobody will get upset about anything. So you've got the factors here, the ones that we're mainly concerned about, these 8. And then as a description, the BBFC sort of give these as guidelines. So the discrimination in there, it's unlikely that there'll be any. But if there is any discrimination, that is really disapproved of, and that is clear. Drug references are infrequent, but they might have an educational purpose if there are any, but it's very anti-drugs. All poor behaviour would be disapproved of strongly, and weapons would not be realistic. It is clear in this sort of sense that anything that a child could imitate would be pushed as being bad. You know, you get told off if you did that. Mild bad language would be infrequent, although unlikely to be there at all. And if there is any nudity, that's got no sexual context. Mild sexual behaviour might be present. In this case, that refers to something like kissing, which is seen as acceptable to show to everybody, and could be there. Scary sequences should be mild with a reassuring outcome. So if there is a threat to somebody, it's mild, but that you're shown that that threat hasn't happened, or if it has happened, then something positive happens afterwards. And violence must be in context, but mild, and it's also justified. It can't be violence for violence sake. These are common examples of films which are classified as U. So Bug's Life, Toy Story 1 and 2, The Little Mermaid, and then Lego Indiana Jones, clearly all aimed at children. PG films are unsuitable for young children. Alright, so some scenes in these films might be unsuitable for those who are younger than 8. So it could upset them, or it could show something that a parent wouldn't quite be happy with. But again, it is difficult to say what would upset a child. Parents might want to watch this first and check that it's not upsetting for younger children or for those who are more sensitive. So again, looking at the language that the BBFC use, they say that discrimination by a character which a child can identify is likely to be unacceptable. And drug use might be there, but again, it will have an anti-drug message. But again, that's not something that's usually common. No details of dangerous behaviour can be shown. That a child might want a copy, so again, not allowing anything that a child could imitate, and glamorising weapons won't be acceptable. Language might be there, but would be mild, and it wouldn't be frequent. And again, nudity, the same as with the U classification, has no sexual context. There might be an innuendo there, a sexual innuendo, but again, that would be very infrequent, and that there is no sexual activity within that film, except for that is acceptable in a U, but it could be implied, so it's taken it up that level. Any threats or violence might be there, but it might not be prolonged, and again, it can't be highly negative. Violence might be there, but again mild, and it's got to be in context. It's again not violence for violence sake. The films that are classified as PG, some of the common ones are The Incredibles, Live and Let Die, which is an older James Bond film, Star Wars Rebels, and The Incredible Hulk. 12 and 12A are not suitable for anyone who's under 12, and you can't go to the cinema to see a 12A if you are 11 unless you have a parent with you. Now if you are 11 and have a parent, then that's fine, but it's recommended that all adults look at what this film's about beforehand. The BBFC have something called BBFC Insight to help with that decision, and that nobody who is younger than 12 can then rent or buy a video that is rated 12. Their parents can, but they can't. Using the factors again, there might be obvious discrimination in there, but the film can't show that in its entirety. It must show the more positive outcome. And the misuse of drugs is infrequent and shouldn't be glamorised. There shouldn't be any form of showing how to use a drug either. The behaviour which could be shown by a child can't be there, so dangerous behaviour shouldn't be shown in such detail that it could be copied, and no weapons can be glamorised, especially weapons like knives. So they're the weapons that are easily available to people, especially children. The same goes for the use of language. It can be moderate. There will be some inappropriate language there, but not very, very strong and not very, very frequent. Here you can see with nudity that's been upped slightly. It can be shown in a sexual context, but it must be brief. And the same with sex, that must be discreet. And quite often you hear more references to sex, but if they're particularly crude or particularly frequent, that won't be allowed. There might be some horror sequences in these films, and that can extend beyond physical threats into psychological threats, but it can't be frequent and it can't be sustained. There might also be some violence, but it shouldn't focus on that for a sustained period of time, and it won't focus on the injuries or blood in specific detail, but there might be some gory moments. Sexual violence might be implied or briefly indicated, but that must be justified. So to look at films which are 12 or 12A, it's things like Fast 5, Spectre, so a James Bond movie. The more recent James Bond have generally been classified higher. Avengers Assemble, Captain America, Thor, they're all 12As, so there is some violence in there, there is some bad language in there, and that's why they've been classified higher. 15 rated films are suitable for those aged 15 and over, and you can't see it in a cinema or buy it if you're under 15. So in a 15 film there may be discrimination, so that could be racist or homophobic or something else, and that would be allowed within the film, but it's got to be counterbalanced to some extent. Drug use might be shown, but it can't be shown within the whole film. And easily accessible drugs cannot be shown to be used. So those are things that are available within the home, such as solvents, because that's something that somebody could see and copy while watching this film on their TV. Dangerous behaviour can't focus on detail which could be copied. So again, something that somebody could do in the home, because remember, this is somebody who is 15 potentially. The depiction of easily accessible weapons might depend on realism and the setting. So that was things such as knives, because again, it's something that could be accessed while somebody's sitting at home watching it. There might be some strong language in there, but it depends on different factors and sort of how often and what is said. There is no restrictions on nudity in a 15 film in a non-sexual context, but it might be allowed in a sexual context, but without a lot of detail. Other factors such as sex can be shown, but again without strong detail, and there might be strong verbal references to sexual behaviour, so it's a step up from a 12A film. There might be a threat in there, and it could be strong horror, based threats, but a large focus on anything sadistic or sexual is unlikely to be accepted. So it's trying to, it could be to do with violence, but if that becomes very sadistic or of a sexual nature, then it's not allowed. The violence in it can't focus on physical pain or the infliction of pain or injury, but there can still be strong violence. So it might be a massive fight scene, but if that focus is then on the infliction of pain, so more on hurting somebody else, then that can't be included. Sadistic violence is not accepted, and particularly gory images aren't accepted. There might be detailed verbal references to sexual violence, but it needs to be in context. 15 films include Scream, but the TV show, Brotherhood, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which is down from I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is an 18, Ray Donovan, the TV show, Bad Santa 2, and Bridget Jones's Baby, which was recently released. 18 films are for adults. You've got to be at least 18 to see it in a cinema or to buy it. The BBFC says that adults have the right to choose their own entertainment, but they do have exceptions which lead to films being classified higher. So where a film is in breach of criminal law, where material or treatment appears to risk harm to individuals or society, and where there are more explicit images of sexual activity. Those are films that might be classified higher to an 18 restricted. 18 films include Scream 1 and 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Roy Chubby Brown, his stand-up show, is seen as being only suitable for adults, as are quite a few others as well. And Game of Thrones, the TV show, that's seen as being for adults only due to the nature of some of the content. The BBFC have suffered from some high-profile controversies over its duration. Watership Down is one that's been classified as a U, but many find it distressing, and there's adults that find that distressing. It's been reclassified several times and always been judged to be a U, and that was in the news recently, within the last few months, about its classification. The Lion King came out about the same time as Aladdin, and it was judged to be similar, but many felt that it was actually supposed to be a PG rating because it's a little bit more fast-paced with its violence, and its sort of issues between, between Scar and Mustafa, and they felt that the overall outcomes could be quite upsetting to young children. Die Hard is classified as a 15, although some of the violence in there was seen to be 18. The reason that it was actually classified as 15 and has subsequently been looked at and classified again as a 15 is because it doesn't really focus on too much on being very much about the gore, and the main character, Bruce Willis's character, kind of deflects that with his personality, so he avoids some of the violence. The Hunger Games is quite a violent film with quite distressing nature, the idea that children are fighting it out against other children. While it was a book originally, it was reworked from the original script to make sure that it was a 12A, to meet with the target audience, people who are likely to have read that book. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was another one, which was quite high profile. Previous Harry Potters had always been PGs, and people were concerned that at a 12A, the target audiences might miss out, so people who had seen the original ones wouldn't be able to see the rest of them. But it was felt that because of the increase in the sort of fighting and the scenes in it, it was needed to be a 12A, but that parents could use their discretion to still take their younger children to see that, as long as they were accompanied. The BBFC, their website is really, really good. There's a lot of podcasts on there to help you see how they've made decisions, and they discuss some of those controversial ratings, whether that's because they're too low or too high in some people's views. So it's well worth looking on there. Other useful sources are obviously the CIM page on OCR's website, the BBFC. There's a couple of YouTube videos out there as well, and there is a PDF on the BBFC which I've used a lot to summarise, but it's well worth a read again. So here's an example from the January 2014 paper, the very first Creative iMedia paper. It says, during the production of the documentary film, because this was in the context of Winged Breath, the age rating of the DVD needs to be considered. State 2 types of content that may affect the age rating of the DVD. So the mark scheme shows things like here you can see violence, foul language and sexual content. It's an EG list, so there is more options there, sort of things like discrimination, threats, drug use, those kinds of answers would be acceptable. But it says must be related to the content of the DVD. So you must remember that.